Very good, thank you. Good evening. This is the Thursday, September 28th Policy Committee meeting of the Council Rock Board of School Directors. I'm Jerry Grubb. I'm the chair of the committee. This evening, we're going to have a rather short agenda regarding policies. We will be covering approximately 4 policies, and our host for that will be primarily Mr. Desko. Mr. Reinhardt will also be supporting. And following that, we're going to immediately move on to 2 discussions of items that have come before the board recently, and we wanted to take an opportunity to discuss them. And with our board schedule, we wanted to discuss them in a public forum. Those 2 topics, which we will get to, are one is regarding the Hanover Research Survey, which is an item which has now been presented to members of the public to review. And the second thing is to further and continue the discussion about grandfathering and redistricting, which had begun at the most recent public board meeting. It is an item of intense interest. Additionally, we have present tonight board members who were not present the other night because of conflicts. With that, I'm going to go around the room for call-outs on attendance, and then we'll get underway.
Barry Desko, Director of K-12 Education.
Matt Frederickson, IT Director.
Bob Reiner, Director of Business Administration.
Ed Tate, School Board.
Kyle McKessie, School Board. Kathleen Mulholland, School Board.
Robert Frazier, Superintendent.
Andy Block, School Board.
Gary Capazzi. Mike Schroeder, School Board.
Very good. Good morning. Good evening. We're just rocking to attendance. Oh, sorry, Denise. Sorry.
It is a public meeting.
It is a public. Let's go ahead again, Denise. I spoke over you.
Okay. School Board.
Very good. And we've also been joined by a member of the public. We're going around just introducing ourselves by name and if we're associated with an organization. You want to do that? You want to introduce yourself, Debbie?
Debbie Moskowitz, Council Rock Coalition for Helping Youth.
Very good, thank you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to, we're going to talk about policy 229, which has to do with student fundraising, and Mr. Reinhardt's going to be our host for that tonight. Mr. Reinhardt.
I reviewed the policy, compared it to the previous policy. It does take out some of the wording within the policies, but I'm very comfortable with this. One area that I would look at, and that is under authority, and it says the board in the new policy prohibits the collection of money by a student for personal benefit in school buildings, on school property, or any school-sponsored activity. The previous policy added one point to it that I would have the board consider, and that is the board prohibits the collection of money in school or on school property or at a school-sponsored event by a student or district employee for personal benefit. So it includes the contemplation of an employee also being involved in it. Since it was there, I would consider putting that back into this new policy. It's omitted from the new policy. Everything else is very similar. Some of the specifics have been taken out of the policy in favor of a administrative regulation.
My only comment would be, is there a policy that covers employees where we should put that part that you're, because this says student fundraising.
Yes.
So, and that would be the only.
Yeah. You know what, I didn't look.
I couldn't find. So there may not be.
Oh, so you looked at this already. You saw the same thing.
But I couldn't find.
Okay. Yes. That's good.
I think it's a good idea. I don't see any harm, even if it is redundant.
Does it change the status then from a student task to an actual, just a generic fundraising on our campus? Would that?
It did not in the past, and I'm not sure, because this is under the student section of the policies. I'm concerned about changing that from student fundraising to overall fundraising.
I'm fine with the inclusion. I think it's a wise choice. I have a question here, though. I know that at times, let me ask this of the administration. If I were a student and I was a member of a religious organization, and we were raising money as part of my religious organization, how would that settle onto this policy with, it's a candy drive, I'm doing a candy drive, and I'm selling candy bars for my religious organization. Not necessarily enriching me, maybe we're doing something else. How would this policy restrict, prohibit, allow?
It's not personal benefit.
I understand that, but what it comes to is,
Or political organization?
okay, but
Republicans, Young Democrats raising money for a campaign.
well, I understand. Well, I was trying to go with one so I was in my mythical.
Let's make it a little bit more provocative.
I was trying not to be that provocative because I think we know where we're going to go on now, and I would like to think we're not going to do it, but even for personal benefit, maybe I'm doing it for, a charity. But the problem I have here is some of our own fundraising is selling M&Ms or chocolate bars or something, and now I've got a kid selling it for their purpose, and I'm going to hold out that it's not for their retreat. Maybe they're doing it because they're running as a charity to help some charity, which isn't religious, but it's being organized. But do I want to have student fundraising on our campus for things that are not associated or authorized by Council Rock? That's my question, particularly where they may cannibalize those things which we have authorized. So as it's written, I'm not trying to put it on the spot, but as it's written, I would like to prohibit that. That's my take on it.
This says for any, so they can do
Well,
for any purpose.
the board prohibits the collection of money by a student for personal benefit.
No, but I'm just looking at definition for purpose of policy. Student fundraising shall include the solicitation, collection of money by students for any purpose.
So those two things need to match. Because personal benefit, which is why I raised it earlier, as you raised your point, personal benefit is very specific. That's not my sister selling Yankee candles, right? So for another organization, regardless of what political or religious affiliation that is, are we trying to restrict fundraising for personal benefit or any at all?
Well, let's be the board on this and decide. My preference in this would be for any and all that isn't approved or authorized that somehow furthers the purposes of the school district, which would be coming from the principal at some point.
Well,
That's just my
would that then preclude,
District
that's like
charities.
Race for Life or whatever we do around the tracks and some of that.
Those are district approved
District
charities.
approved, but they're not necessarily district benefit. So I agree with you. I think it just comes down to district approved things. So that somewhere there's collection of money for district approved activities, and then we've got to set some either administrative regs against those.
But allow me to ask, collection of money by approved school organizations may be permitted by the building principal. So if we're running Run for Life, Denise, what's the one you're always,
That's the one I was thinking.
is that the one that?
Relay for life.
Relay for Life, sorry.
Relay for Life?
Yeah, that's the one I was trying to think of. So somehow that's connected to the school, right? Have we somehow approved that?
I don't know if it's not. I just think there's stuff that's on our site that just might be using our site, 501c3 that's.
I don't know that it's like directly, but the is a community, well, actually happens to be a teacher now, but that's.
You're hard to, if you're on this, closer to the phone would work well. We're having trouble.
Sorry, I think that's more.
I don't want to say no, but we're hard. It's difficult.
Sorry.
No problem. Life's like that.
Denise, it sounds more like a service problem than it does being close to the phone.
Okay.
Okay, on the road under construction, I pulled over into the shoulder between. Relay for Life is, I wouldn't necessarily call it a Council Rock, it's not like a Council Rock event, but it's supported by the Council Rock schools. The chair happens to be a teacher itself, the community chair, who works together with the American Cancer Society coordinator. So it is something that involves every one of our schools.
We could change this. Collection of money by approved school organizations or approved fundraising campaigns? Because you do, in essence, are we approving that somehow? Someone. Right.
Yes,
So-
at the building level,
Technically, it's by the superintendent,
Okay.
if it's an outside organization.
But it's approved by you, yeah.
Yes.
But going back to students who want to raise money for a religious something or other that we might not want to happen, we need to ensure that there's a way for them to seek approval against a set of rules or against the standard. And I don't know if that's administrative regulations that get in here, but if there's fundraising and/or activities on our grounds, we should be approving those under a consistent set of standards, right?
Well, yeah, and it's, I don't mean to try and make this more complex than it is, but
No, I'm not either, but it makes a gray area when you
I
have
think,
to tell somebody yes, somebody no.
I think we're good with the superintendent because you can approve, you're gonna approve things which are non-sectarian, non-denominational, non-political, I hope. I just wanna make sure, what does this mean when someone leases the property or rents the property and it's not a school activity, but they're gonna raise money and maybe they're collecting funds on school grounds?
So I would imagine that they're gonna be a 501c3, they gotta pay the rate, and then we can attach to our usage policy guidelines that say, if you're gonna raise money, then you gotta, that's, right, we gotta somehow figure that out. Because we're already putting standards on anybody that leases, right? Or existing.
Right.
Yeah, I think the carve out has to be that, when, I think the carve out, the definition would not have this carve out, I think it should, which is, if I've leased the North Stadium,
Then this policy applies.
if not, if I've leased it, no, it doesn't. I'm running that, I've leased it for whatever purpose, and I'm doing fundraising there for whatever. I've leased it. If I'm paying you to use the property, I can raise money to do something there. That may be my choice. I may be holding a political campaign. I'm allowed to do that. I'm allowed to lease it for a political purpose. We're not restricted that. As long as I provide security, insurance, and those things, I can lease that for a political purpose.
An equal opportunity to everybody.
Yeah.
No, I'm asking.
No,
Okay,
right. And so if I'm doing that and I want to pass the hat and I have a student, happens to be a student, they're walking around collecting money for the campaign, I lease the property.
I look at that as like Cruises having their tournament we talk about. They're raising money for their organization. They lease the property. We have nothing to do about how they.
So I want to
understand one thing from you, Jerry, because you threw something at me that I wasn't sure, and I'm not sure how to respond to it. Is, let's say a kid is selling Girl Scout cookies out of her locker.
She's not, unless.
Is that follow? Is this
That would
included
not,
in here?
that would not be approved unless explicitly approved by the superintendent.
That's right. That's what this says down here under delegation of responsibility.
Okay, so then we're saying that the building administration should stop that from occurring.
Unless the Girl Scouts approach the superintendent and make a proposition that, we would like our girls to sell. We don't, let me just be clear. Our schools don't sponsor Girl Scouts. Those are normally, I remember when Nat was little and Jake was little, there was.
They come to our schools and use our buildings.
Right.
I don't think there are any affiliation.
And typically, the Girl Scout leaders are grade level parents.
I understand, but they're not, that makes,
Yeah.
they're.
So then for this policy under definition, since everything we're talking about would be covered under administrative regulation as determined by the superintendent, do we need to add the word approved between any and purpose? What policy is going to be? For any purpose consistent with administrative regulations, or is that assumed?
It would be approved. Where are you looking? Give me the line. Under.
Definition, second line,
Thank you.
shall include the solicitation collection of money by students for any purpose now. So do we need to reference or say any approved purposes or any purpose consistent with administrative regulation?
I think the word approved would be helpful.
I think I just think it adds a little bit more clarity.
All right, I'm completely lost.
But you know what? I think the definition of student fundraising should not, the definition should not. I think the definition should not, it should be any fundraising. That's the definition. because then under delegation of authority, you can specifically authorize.
I think it makes it more clear, but whatever the majority, I mean, you know what I'm getting at. Yes.
Because it says at the bottom, it's all restricted, but collection by students on behalf of school organizations outside the schools. Oh. I'm sorry, I missed.
I mean, you get a kid who gets in there and says, oh, I can do it for any of them, they don't bother to understand it's gotta be approved, or they might not go down and check that there's administrative regulations. It's just one piece, the main piece of policy has gotta be approved that makes somebody think before they do something, or at least makes it easier for us to point to it. So they. Bob, he's contemplating, can I ask another question? This policy would not approve to our individual student groups fundraising off campus. So as an example, these car washes.
That's the second thing under delegation of responsibility. To solicit off campus needs explicit permission.
Sorry, okay.
That's where I got tripped up in that phrase.
Got it. In practice, are they checking off with anybody for all the booster fundraisers they do?
I believe most of the administration of this is at the school level. I do believe this is going to create a committee with me getting things together.
That wasn't intended.
It wasn't intended, but when I look at it, I believe that I want to make sure there's clarity in this now.
So from a cash management perspective, because
That's a whole different section. That is.
Okay.
Policy 601.
Okay.
It's over in a whole different section, and I did look at that policy when I was looking at this, and it's an old policy, and I'm probably going to
But
look at
it's something
that.
we need to look at, right?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Well, it's an AR, actually. It's an AR.
I
It talks about
Do
the
we-
cash handling.
Do we think that this needs just to be perfected between now and again, or is that, I think you guys got some direction. I think you might just want to think about
Wordsmith it at the time.
how you operationalize it.
Yep.
And some minor changes and
We'll see it again.
Do you want to see it again or do you want to see the board?
I think we want to see it again because we only give Robert a chance to, and Barry a chance to, and Robert and Bob a chance to develop the ARs around it, to operationalize it so it's right. But I appreciate, first of all, because we want to include the fact that it's for when a property is under lease or under contract to be used for something, it can be used to collect money for that purpose. I'm really very appreciative of the idea that we're not allowing students. You know, Penn State has now eliminated much of that collect a can stuff out in the street because that proved to be a danger for Vaughn.
You wouldn't have known that last week.
I can see they're just out there.
You were not around last week.
It's actually prohibited by Penn State. So this will come back to us for discussion at a policy meeting. Really? Was that bad?
It was, I didn't see
Where was I
anything.
last? I was recovering from work. All right.
I'm
Thank you.
dismissed.
With prejudice. Yeah. With extreme prejudice. No,
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Bob.
Good to see you.
I'll be in touch.
Mr. Desko, you get to escort us through for the remaining three policies tonight.
Okay. So the admission of students policy 201 is really a combination of two current policies we have. We have a separate policy on admission to kindergarten and another policy on admission to first grade. So they've just combined those. A couple things I think we have to give consideration to here. Let me draw first the way they write this. Under kindergarten, they speak of the age being reached by the first day of the school term. And in first grade, they write it as before September 1. So I think we should be consistent with that. My recommendation would probably be to use the first day of the school term because we sometimes start in August, and it would make sense that that would be the cutoff date for attaining the appropriate age for registration.
Speaking only for myself, I like that. The only thing I come to is that because of the way we set the start date, people will argue things like, well, if he was this age next year, he would have been in first grade. It doesn't make sense, but if we started a day earlier this year, then he'd be in first grade. Instead, I have him home. It leaves it for you guys in the administration, it puts at board, it puts the burden on us in terms of our decision each year may impact people and become a source of argument.
So there is a readiness opportunity for parents to have the child tested and submit the documentation to our schools to determine if they believe a child is ready before attaining that age. So there's an opportunity, and we do receive those regularly, to see if they, when I'm addressing, I think, the third paragraph there, underneath first grade. So upon written request of the parent guardian, recommendation of the district psychologist, and approval of the superintendent. So we do occasionally have parents whose child may miss the cutoff by a week or 2 weeks or even a month. They believe their child's ready, and they submit the documentation to us prior to we mark it as prior to the end of the school year, so that our staff is available to review documentation.
I leave it to your discretion. I think the two dates should be the same, whatever they are. I just leave it with you, that I just don't want to put you in a position where a person registering a student who's looking ahead, because that means that the person with a 3-year-old who's trying to think of where they're going to be for kindergarten may not know concretely where they're going to be for kindergarten 2 years later, because we haven't set the official board calendar. If it were September 1st, they know what's going on, meaning they can prep for that readiness thing if they thought they needed to.
Current policy is September 1st in both kindergarten and first grade.
I'll defer to you, but I wanted to give you that input from an operational perspective. So you
Makes sense.
decide which way you want to do it.
Okay.
I'm the same about making the same. I actually like September 1st, but I don't have to operationalize it.
Anybody else has an opinion one way or the other?
All right, so we'll make them both September 1st. It sounds like it's.
First,
You're agreeing with September 1st, Denise?
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, we'll make both the kindergarten should be September 1st, rather than the first day of the school term. The next two parts of this, I think need a little bit of a discussion. They've made it, we go to kindergarten. They are marking, and they suggest not less than 4 years old. That's a full year sooner than what we currently have in school district policy. Ours is 5 years old. And then we use 6 for first grade, and they use 5 years and 7 months. So they're recommending school districts get to determine the age at which a child can start in those areas. I'm a little uncomfortable with 4 years old for kindergarten. I just think it's too soon. I would suggest we stay with 5. And whether or not we want to lessen the 6 to 5 years, 7 months, I guess that's open for conversation. It's nice and clear when you're doing birthday to birthday, for years, rather than trying to navigate months and 31 days in a month versus 30. My recommendation, we would stay with the 5 and the 6. I think it served us well. It gives children a chance to be mature enough to enter. And again, especially for first grade, parents have that opportunity to petition us if they think a child's ready to start sooner.
Yeah, and from my perspective,
I defer to you, but yeah,
exactly. But also, just because it's a public meeting, and while we talk among ourselves, these are members of both named references, kindergarten is not an obligation of the school district, so that creation of the start date is really within our domain in its entirety. So, having said that, I'll defer to you. You have to make this work. Again, my only concern with this thing is whatever we decide gives the persons enough vision in the front that they know they would know with their 1-year-old what their time frame would be. That's all I request out of it.
Okay, so 5 for kindergarten, 6 for first grade.
Any other comments or concerns? Everyone would be okay with this, with leaving those 2 items and coming to vote at the next meeting?
Yes.
Very good, thank you. Denise, you're good, that's right.
I'm good.
Cool.
Okay, 202, we spoke about at the last meeting and started the conversation. So I'll just draw attention to 2 areas that I think, or I guess there's a couple that I would ask for your consideration of. One is to change the policy to reflect what is our current practice. So where it talks about, the board secretary, we had a little bit of this conversation last time, that right now our practice is they file that with the director of K-12 education for residential support. So, and again, further down, that same information talks about requests for personnel regarding residency and non-residency be referred to the Director of Special Services. Dr. Lambert doesn't handle that. My office handles that, so I would just replace that again with Director of K-12 Education.
You have in this actually, so.
Yeah, I wrote those in.
Yeah, that's
So I just want to make sure that we're clear. And then really the one that was the major part of the conversation related to this particular policy last time was we talked about seniors. And it wasn't clear the way this policy was written, so I added regularly enrolled students entering their senior year whose parents, guardians have moved out of the district shall be allowed to complete their year on a tuition basis. So that is again our current practice, and we said we wanted to memorialize that in policy.
And definition of regularly enrolled.
Well, I kept that since the prior to or speaking to regularly enrolled in my definition, and I think what the intent of that is that they are currently Council Rock students. They're on our rolls. They are here and have the appropriate proofs of residency that attend our schools, and that would be a continuation of that.
So regularly enrolled. At a gross level, I imagine that is someone who has completed their 11th grade here and meets all of the other residential requirements of Council Rock. That's what I'm trying to get to, which is, because I regularly enrolled, I'm just kind of struggling with what that.
Well, what if someone started 11th grade here, then moved to a private school for 6 months, then wanted to come back to, maybe it excludes those kids if they weren't regularly enrolled at Council Rock.
So let's play that scenario out. So they started 11th grade
Here at Council Rock,
and somewhere mid-year they went to a private school.
right?
And then after that point, their parents have moved away.
Yeah,
This is only for moving away. And the expectation is that they would want to come back.
that would be not regularly enrolled.
It wouldn't be enrolled. They would not have, in my definition, they would not have finished their 11th grade year. They would have already said, well, I'm moving away from my friends because I went to that private school.
Yeah, that would be a no in my mind.
Yeah, but it's not regularly enrolled.
And I guess we could add to the definition regularly enrolled as of the final day of school of their junior year. Students entering their senior year as parents moved out of the district. I mean, we could define that if that's helpful to.
I think you leave it regularly enrolled.
I think it's clear.
Okay, I'm not gonna, I just wasn't sure, because it's used as if it were, it's not both capitalized, but it's used as if it were a defined term, and I wasn't sure where the definition was.
Yeah, I tried to stay in line with what the board, with PSBA had suggested on the two prior, where they used the term regularly enrolled. So I just want to be consistent with those.
Right.
Do you just want to define what regularly enrolled means somewhere?
Well, as I said, we could do that if that's helpful.
Well, I think greater clarity can't hurt. I don't know that a layperson would necessarily understand your definition or the district's definition of regularly enrolled. So I don't think it would hurt to define what we view as regularly enrolled.
I would just ask that the definition be such that you can't game it in the end. You know?
And I do want to remind you, I mean, it's on a tuition basis, so for a lot of people, it's just not an option because of the cost.
Understood.
So it's
What
not,
is
it's
that
not that they
tuition?
just get to select to remain here and it's, comes without tuition, it's costly.
What is the tuition? I'm curious.
It varies every year based on the budget. This year, I think it's a little bit different for elementary and secondary. One is 14 something and one is 13,000.
Is that a state?
It's a bargain, actually.
No, it's actually the business office calculates it
It's
for
your
us
per
every
pupil cost,
summer. Yeah, and there's, I don't know that.
Other variables.
Yes, I'm not sure that every aspect of the budget is used in the calculation, but Bob's office provides it to my office every year, and that's the number that's used.
So should we,
It's a private school.
is it unnecessary, but is it,
Right.
it is by definition then going to be a pro rata tuition. It is going to be pro rata.
Are you talking about?
Now, all the tuitions on the former residents.
Well, yeah.
It's going to be on a monthly tuition basis.
Correct. We do give them a payment plan. And right, they could depart with the year.
Well, the first two instances, they're not
Year
here for a
early,
year.
correct.
Yeah.
So would you like a regularly enrolled definition?
And then you can just, I don't need a second read, as long as you've got some definition.
Yeah, we'll just-
If you want to float it to the board.
At the bottom, I'll just speak to what regularly enrolled means.
Yeah.
That's.
Yeah.
As long as we don't,
I'm trying to.
I don't think we're changing much. We're accepting his commentary about replacing the board secretary with the director of K-12. We're replacing the director of special ed with his director of K-12. As long as those are in agreement with law or whatever the citation 7/8s are, as long as those are in agreement with that, we'll be in agreement with that. The other thing was, if he could craft something around regularly enrolled, realizing that the regularly enrolled and not, it's
Just
just,
in three different, in this, and that's the only thing I want to, so that's why I said if we wanted to define it, I'd be more apt to speak to what regularly enrolled means for this additional seniors year, because these students above are already in our schools.
exactly.
So I would put regularly enrolled and speak to as of the last day of school of their junior year in the Council Rock School.
I think it's only a qualifier on the
Yes.
third.
Okay.
third instance.
Again, I'm fine, as long as you've got something that works for you.
Okay, I'll put it in that third sentence then.
And then, so that came back, showing me that enroll homeless students, even if a student or parent guardian is unable to produce the required documents in accordance with policy, with board policy, laws, and regulations. Out of curiosity, on a homeless student, are there administrative follow-ups that have to happen? I imagine there's some.
Yeah, Dr. Lambert is our homeless liaison.
Right.
So whenever, Rudy, correct. So whenever we have somebody make a claim of homelessness, he is the person that that conversation begins with, and there is a intermediate unit person who is the oversees it for the county.
Okay.
And if we have questions, they answer those questions for us.
All right, so just so I understand, so if someone claims homelessness, we immediately enroll them without the documentation because that's the right thing, that's under federal law. Rudy and the IU person begin their investigation. Is there a time frame around how long it takes that determine how long that determination?
Well, often it's not even a time frame. I mean, if someone makes a claim of homelessness, then, you know, if that continues beyond a year, then there's a follow-up to make sure that they've not attained housing, because there's transportation involved in it, depending on where the student is residing. Could be a shared cost between two districts to provide the busing or transportation to and from where they currently are residing. So an example could be a Council Rock student becomes homeless and moves into Ben Salem. Then Ben Salem and Council Rock have to coordinate how to bus that student to their school because that's their legal right to continue to attend the school that they were in before they became homeless.
And lastly, on the homelessness, and I'm fine with this as it is, it's really just an interest in the homelessness question. Do we engage the CARES team on those, for those students?
The counselors lead that charge for.
Okay, so we provide other.
Yes,
So I mean, obviously, you know, there are supportive
there are. Yes.
things in place.
Our social workers and our counselors take care of those students, yes.
Objections, concerns with this coming forward for final read? That's going to go for final read. I have two of them. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
So 220 is student expression and distribution and posting of materials. What PSBA has provided here fits with what our current practices are in terms of how we handle these. Although it's a pretty lengthy list of actions and responsibilities, it is indeed exactly what we do within our schools as it relates to student expression.
So the administrators in the room are good with this?
Yes, we are. You know, I'll add a piece just because it's been relevant here lately.
Yeah.
You know, if we have any controversial or offensive symbols to some people, that students are expressing through their attire or otherwise. Ordinarily, students are protected by their First Amendment rights. So we're actually pretty limited in terms of what we can enforce or force. That said, with certain symbols currently, and I'll use a Confederate flag as an example, because we're in the environment that we are in right now, we are provided much more freedom and much more liberty to take action and force a change. It all comes down to a law case. Tinker is the name of that case, and it's around what causes or could cause a substantial disruption in the schoolhouse. So under normal circumstances, a student chooses to wear whatever they choose to wear, unless it is causing a disruption or about to cause a disruption. Really, the students are protected by those free speech rights. But when you're in a climate where there's been a recent history of difficulty, tension, et cetera, around that particular issue, then policy or no policy, it gives us the right to take action.
Or frankly, from my personal opinion, if there's something out there that causes a student a disruption to where they can't learn, we should be able to take action.
Right, agreed.
And that policy speaks to that.
Yeah.
Right.
And I asked, and I don't want anybody to misconstrue it, I'm just trying to understand, when we talk about freedom of expression, my employer, all of our employers, if they are private companies, can write whatever rules they want about what we say or do in the office. That's fine. Now you may say that's a private employer they're going against my First Amendment right. The First Amendment is actually a prohibition against government restrictions upon private speech or personal speech. So if my employer, and I'm not employed by the governmental agency, says I can't do X or Y, that's their right.
You don't have to work with it.
We're in a different space because we're, by definition, a branch of the government. So when you read the Bill of Rights and you look at the one that speaks about First Amendment rights, that is addressing us as a school board and our right to restrict expression. So we carry a dangerous weapon when we want to try and restrict that. So in that context, I'm trying to understand, you stipulate, agree, the possession or wearing of a Confederate item in school, which I would imagine would also include then a gray cap with a Confederate uniform outside of the context of an educational thing. I would imagine it does. But playing the other side of it, trying to understand, were students that come to school with a T-shirt with the outline of Africa, with the colors that are typically associated with an African map. I don't know what that means, but there are colors. It's like red, yellow. It's like green, black, and yellow, I think. Is that going to be something that we would prohibit a student from wearing that to show that their identification with that sentiment or organizational area of the government, whatever area of the world, whatever. So I don't know. I just, that's where, I'm trying to understand, what does it mean? We would say that is pride in that heritage and not meant to be, denigrating anybody else. I think that's probably where we go. But I just bring it up because it's to exemplify the difficult sea in which we swim and the difficult decisions that this board, this administration and this board have to make on a day-to-day basis, which is, when is something that one person exhibits offensive to someone else or restrictive on someone else or condemnation? I don't know what to do with it. I just wanted to put it forward. You worry about these things. We have to think about, that's probably, okay. I looked at over the weekend, we certainly agree on the surface, the Nazi symbol, the swastika, is certainly one of those things we'd restrict. But unfortunately, there are a number of symbols used by political groups now that in and of themselves are not racist or are not anti-Semitic, but are used by groups who are. So we're going to have to cover this ground inch by inch, situation by situation. It's great to try and make policy, which is what we're sitting here doing tonight, but it's not perfect. It's not going to be perfect. And that's my purpose for making this little bit of a soliloquy here.
And I think it's worth noting that with Tinker, I just was reading about Tinker because of all that's going on. The onus is then on the school district to defend themselves and prove that offense was being made, which is a very difficult thing to do.
That's right.
If someone should sue. Now, I don't think anybody really wants to spend $12,000 on an attorney to make that case over a shirt, you know, I would hope, you know, but it is a tricky law.
Well, it's also, so some of what I saw in reviewing what happened at last night's meeting, you know, to the point that you raised, Jerry, perhaps there is a perception that we are reactive rather than proactive, as opposed to the shades of gray here are so challenging, and we're dealing with so much on a case-by-case basis to allow people their rights and freedoms, to protect people from what they need protection from. And to Jerry's point, it is very challenging. Certainly. I don't know where you draw the lines, and we're going to have to tackle that.
Well, and
sure.
freedom of speech, you're right, and freedom of speech cuts both ways. I mean, I was reading this morning about there is a growing national concern about the take a knee protest, whatever you think of it. My personal opinion is that I admire what a lot of people are doing, but there's concern about that occurring in the school setting, at school athletic events. And, you know, again, it's important. Educators around the country are being reminded students have a First Amendment right, and it's an important thing to protect.
Yeah.
It is, and you know, to the discussion, you know, this is, let me be very clear, this is student expression. Now, I'm sure, and in light of some things that have been discussed publicly, we have an analogous, and I don't know why we don't see it, but we should shortly, which also has, staff has, to an extent, a right of expression as well. I think we have slightly more domain over that as employer, but it is still not carte blanche that a private employer has. So we need to be aware of that. So we should be seeing in the next few weeks or months the staff expression, and I would ask tonight that we do put that on a little bit of an accelerated push up in our calendar just because of the topics of discussion. At the same time, I want to be very clear. There was discussion about an event this summer. This policy, let's be very clear. This policy does not include anything to do with what students do at home, on the internet, away from school, unless there's some nexus to the school. So some of the incidents that have been reported publicly, this has no bearing on that and is outside of our domain. Again, and this is personal commentary, not necessarily board opinion, but you know, this summer we had someone who was not in the employ of the district who was on our campus with a Confederate flag. When asked to leave, the person did remove it. Had the person been in a private vehicle parked on public property, and we are a public entity, when school is not in session, we would not have a leg to stand on to ask them to stop expressing that. We control the property, but if it's not, and you brought up before, is it disruptive? School wasn't in session, students weren't present, we weren't controlling access to the facility to, you know, for the safety and security of students. We revert to a public property. Our rights to close the property are only to protect the facility, and we close it at night. Then actually don't close it. We post it at night, and the police are known to take observation of vehicles on the property. So this is not, the whole concept here of freedom of expression is something, you know, it's not like mathematics where you can work out all the problems in advance. You know, you don't have all the inputs, you don't have all the situations. And so For me, what we're looking at here, I don't see any problem with what we're looking at here. Does anybody have a problem with the student expression 1, 2, 3?
I think it's great. I think this is, like, we're going to put Robert's ears. I want to make sure that this does so provide for them to make judgment calls, and I would encourage them to be very, very aggressive in their judgment calls given the current environment, because something that you see out there might not have ramifications as you sit there in that particular minute, but it could have ramifications. It's a bigger issue in the community. So, you know, again, I'm fine with everything here, but, you know.
Let's be very clear. You know, the famous quote, if you don't like sausage or the law, don't watch them being made. Law, when it's passed, is then tested by precedent. And precedent comes, occurrences happen, and that sets precedent. You know, there have been other things that have happened in the district. Robert and I have had a private conversation because something was handled administratively, and I don't necessarily agree, but it's a learning. It's how do we make those decisions and feedback loop. We can't pre-think all of them. And so it's a long preface or long soliloquy. I think this policy will come forward for final read, but you know, none of these are cast in stone, and they will be modified and adapted as the world turns.
I just, my perspective is that the question is, does this give the administration the latitude that it needs to make the judgment call that they need to in order to preserve the order within our schools?
But there really is, like, there's no latitude. I mean, the law is the law. So each case is subject to challenge.
Their judgment call disruption. That's where we've got to, because in this policy, if it, you know, either ties back to all the stuff that we got going back and forth about the mascot, it's on social media, it's outside our purview, but the minute it goes to, it could create an altercation. It could be disruptive to school.
Yeah, but it doesn't have much to stand on legally. That's my point.
Well,
that's what you have to be concerned about. You have to be consistent, right?
there's a little bit of history in here.
That's where it's
I was just going to say, maybe it's helpful to, I mean, this probably is what speaks to what the conversation it says, and this is where the administration has an opportunity to intervene in these things, are likely to or do materially or substantially interfere with the educational process, including school activities, school work, or discipline and order on the school property or its school functions, threaten serious harm to the school or community, encourage unlawful activity, or interfere with another's rights. That's the statement in this policy that allows us to intervene in something if we see it interfering with the school day. So
the challenge I would imagine you all face is going back to what we discussed earlier. If something happens outside of school time, before school is in session, it is August. If, no matter how offended one might be, that is not within our purview necessarily, until and unless whatever that issue was, despite the fact that it occurred off of school property, not on school devices outside of school time, and on a parent's watch or simply not the district's watch. How do you make the determination when the response to that trickles in to the school day, into the school population? When it becomes enough of a distraction?
well, you know,
And I'm posing that as a
I
challenge,
get it.
not a challenge that's where it gets very, very difficult.
It does, and it's hard to answer in generalizations because every situation is very
Sure.
unique. So some things that weren't as much an issue a year or two ago now are, because we recognize the substantial disruption to the school day. 5 years from now, it'll be something else. So, I mean, it really is a case-by-case basis, and when the administration begins to get a sense that it's conflicting with their ability to manage a school day, and it's beginning to interfere with the educational program for the students in the school, at that point in time, they begin to intervene. But you're right, as a standalone, it occurred in the summer, we're not even in school, there's very little we can do, and it can't.
There's very little you should do.
Yeah, and it's not impacting our school day, we're not even in school. So, I mean, you're right, there's limitations.
I'm slightly digressing. Did the newspaper article failed to include the point that the administration immediately reported to police that Instagram incident.
I don't recall reading that in the article.
I don't think it was in the article, which was a point I thought was really important to make. While that particular incident, since we're talking about it, was outside of school, was not within our control in any fashion, when it came to our attention, the administration immediately reported it to police, which was the right thing to do.
And you and I will disagree on that. And we'll disagree from this perspective. I don't mean to cut you off.
No, fine. I'm
And
not.
we'll disagree, which is, what I do, which is that if someone was concerned about that and brought it to our attention, they could and should have brought it to the
Yes.
police if they were concerned. It's not our job to be police officers or administrators of the community's reactions outside of the school. So we will disagree. It's not that they were wrong, and truthfully, Robert and his staff within their domain as human beings are allowed to report things to police that would concern them, and that's holy. But I think that the onus there is on the persons to whom the aggrieved party to bring it to the police's attention. Why the whisper down the line for reporting things to police is not the way to go. Let me also remind, and again, this is for the community at large, which is we're an institute of learning. We're an institute of education. Children have to, there are things discussed in schools which, when we were talking about some things before, someone said, would you bring those topics into your office? Well, that topic wouldn't be appropriate to my office. My office is a software company. Some topics aren't appropriate there. But if I were working in a hospital setting, things about a sexual nature might be appropriate because it's diagnosing someone. Helping children to learn and experience things. We don't teach the Bible in our schools. That's not in our domain. However, making reference to Bible as literature or aspects of history,
Or studying world religion.
right, is appropriate. And so, everything, and so when we have someone, we had a teacher who had a Confederate flag. Now, granted, we can argue whether it's appropriate to have it displayed when not in the context, but having it in the context of education, it's true. We have textbooks that have representations of Adolf Hitler and in not full Nazi regalia. Okay, they're in the context. So I can't. Things will be in the school setting, which will be upsetting to people and will be disturbing to people. You're right. They need to have context, and we need to contextualize them so they understand what they are. But I do not want, I make no bones, I hide nothing about this, I'm proud of my heritage. Part of my heritage includes the phrase regarding the Holocaust of never again. But part of that never again means you have to know it occurred, and you have to be educated. I was an advocate for a few years ago, and the school district has done a good job, better than many, about Holocaust education. Okay, because if you don't know about these things, they will, the potential to recur. So I don't mean to protract it. I am supportive of the administration, Robert. It is not an easy sea to swim in. We can always get better at things, but part of it is going to be the experience of moving forward and learning from it.
Can I ask just a couple questions here relative to the electronic piece? So under posting,
Which page?
Two. Actually, let me start on one. Under expression, verbal, written, symbolic representation, communication. Would that?
Speak up, I can't hear you.
Under expression, verbal, written, symbolic representation, or communication. Does that? I can't believe somebody can't hear me. Sorry, Denise. Electronic or virtual, would that be covered? Or does that need to be in there?
I believe it's covered because it says communication, written or verbal. So texting, posting, all of that is written.
Okay, so that goes without saying. Then as I move on to posting, my question is around social media, and obviously we have no purview on kids and their devices outside of school, but kids on their devices inside of school or on social media inside of school, if they're posting virtually, does that,
Well, I think, I mean,
Putting something up on a wall is no different than putting it up on Instagram if you do it in school where everybody can see it. I don't know. I'm asking.
right, so some of the electronic, potential electronic violations fall under some of our other policies like bullying, harassment, et cetera. This, in terms of posting, is the opportunity for students to request of the administration to post something related to their club, their activity, whatever it is, and having that reviewed and posted on school-owned property websites, et cetera, or school websites, student websites owned by the school, bulletin boards in the school, hallways, et cetera. So that's what this posting is speaking to.
Okay, so somewhere in another policy, if there's inflammatory stuff that's going on in school, online, we can do something about it.
I think the unprotected student expression is where those things fall.
Okay.
You're speaking to.
It's useful, and I say this for the experience of the board members in the room. We are a limited public forum. A number of years ago, we had a student who wished to produce a newspaper for distribution in the school. The newspaper was called The Rock, and really was a Christian-oriented proselytizing instrument, you know, and was, I won't say, I can't fairly say it was intended to, but reading it, one could get the impression was that it was to solicit people to begin to be followers of the Christian religion. The school district is not in its right to restrict that in its entirety, to ban it. We are a limited public forum. We were able to produce or come to an agreement on how that could be available in the school, but also we also had to caution the author of that at that time about some of the writings in there were denigrating to other groups or other religions or other aspects of persons' beliefs, and that would not be tolerated. So we were able to come to accommodation, and that's what much of this is. We worked through how to make that an accommodation, and that survived for many months that way until the person elected no longer to do it. We're a limited public forum, so we need to be aware of what that means. We're all good for the policies we came to discuss. Are we good with that aspect of it?
Yep.
All right, we're going to continue on with that. I'm going to ask Debbie, as you come to visit, and you're with Coalition of Healthy Youth, and they have had input on many of these things for our surveys in the past. If you'd like to sit up at the table with us, just if you want to be part of this conversation coming up, you're welcome to join us as we begin to talk about the Hanover Research Survey, which was distributed among the school district. I hope nobody minds if I invite Debbie, but she's had a long history.
That's great.
I think it's great.
Good.
I'll open the discussion. I guess this was my request as an item, so I'll open it. This week, there was a notification of the board and then a subsequent distribution, I imagine, to the community about a survey which really was meant to measure, if I understand it correctly, the climate of diversity issues. Is that how would we characterize it?
It's a general climate survey, inclusive of diversity issues.
Hanover Research was engaged by this district on June 15th at a board meeting. Mary had presented that we had an engagement with them. We engaged them. I watched the minutes of that meeting. I was in the car traveling at the time, and I didn't get any definition at that time of what the survey was going to be. And so this week, when I saw that the survey was being distributed, I became concerned because I don't know the mechanics of that. In fact, I didn't realize that it was being distributed online. So historically, we have a policy, I believe it's 235, which requires that surveys conducted by outside organizations needed notification to the board. Because this is going out over or under the Hanover logo, it looks like it's a survey being conducted by an outside organization. When you look, I received a printed copy of it, and it wasn't going out as a Council Rock.
But it went out on Council Rock this survey.
Yes. And the preface says that it was created in conjunction with the Council Rock School District.
I guess my concern around this was I didn't get, maybe I didn't get the listserv, but I didn't get a measure of what the protections were for students. Part of the conversation around students, I believe, includes questions regarding whether, I don't remember if it includes gender identity, but it may include sexual orientation, you know. And I was concerned when I saw that, because remember, I had received this as a PDF, and if this were being distributed as a PDF, what was the collection process for this? How was I protecting the confidentiality of a student who handed this to a teacher? I remember many years ago, Pat Toner, who was our human sexuality course at South, you know, in a conversation with her one time, she had expressed that, you know, more than one time a student had revealed to her privately that they were gay or that they were a lesbian, and that they were not out. And so I became concerned when I saw that we were collecting, what I thought was we were collecting this by paper. I'm going to effectively stop here. We're not collecting them by paper. Is that
That's
true?
right.
Okay.
We have a few extra copies, paper copies. That's only for folks who don't have access electronically.
And when those are collected, how are those collected? Are they put into an envelope by the person who completed them?
Barry, I'm looking to you on the mechanics of that.
Yeah, Susan O'Grady provided the copies to the front desk where they would be collected and placed into an envelope, and then provided to hand over to include in the survey results.
I really want, again, this goes to protection of privacy. That's my biggest problem here was the lack of the mechanics of the effort. You know, that it's great that they're there. Each one should have an envelope with it that can be sealed, so that when the person completes it, they can hand it in, because if they reveal something which is confidential, I don't want the secretary knowing who handed it to them that said,
Agreed.
I'm this, that, or the other thing, or I fear for this, that, or the other thing.
Agreed.
That's my, so my angst, and I needed to bring it to a public station, because we really can't talk about it as individuals. I'm very concerned about confidentiality of students, of community, you know, and what those records mean. I'm also concerned, again, I have not had, have to be honest, I've been intensely busy. If there's an opportunity for verbatims on this, is there an opportunity to enter verbatim information on these records?
Verbatim being
Verbatim written.
and there's
Yeah.
one at the end of the survey, there's one box for people that want to add information.
Right. Here's my problem. And again, it has to be in a public meeting. The district commissioned these. Those items are by definition public records and subject to a right to know request in their entirety, because they're collected by the district and they are pseudonymized, meaning that I understand we're gathering IP addresses. Are we gathering IP addresses of the persons responding?
We are not.
Is the company is acting at our request. Are they gathering IP addresses?
They are checking to make sure there are not multiple IP addresses, multiple respondents from a single IP address, but they're not providing us IP addresses.
I have to tell you, I believe you may be under that impression, but I don't believe that's correct. My understanding is that anybody who responded from that survey from within the school district will be coming back. Matt, you're the IT guy. Anybody responding from within the school district is going to generate the same IP address, are they not?
That's correct.
So that would be wrong. Then
Or student surveys.
yeah, anybody who responded as a student, can a student not respond? Well, so they all come in with the same IP address. So I don't believe then that they're discriminating to mark out IP addresses and eliminate duplicates, because I can't have duplicates in a home.
No, I didn't say they were eliminating duplicates. I said that they were able to see if there were multiples coming from a single IP address.
But then they're gathering the IP address.
They have access to the IP address. They're seeing the IP address.
It's part of the record. I'm just concerned because you come to the fact that I do not like verbatims in this type of record when the school district gathers them, because if there's a right to know request, you have to provide that, and if it reveals somebody's anonymous information, I don't know how you're going to fix it. So I'm really concerned about that. I want you to impart from this. We are doing what we're doing. The other thing is there has been a board sensitivity. I may be the only remnant of this about these things. When we did the pays, which is, I did not invite Debbie tonight, but I'm sure you came as part of, I don't invite you, but Debbie Muskets. But we do the pays survey, which stands for Pennsylvania
Youth Survey.
Youth Survey, which has a number of personal related questions. we are always cautious about that, and we're very clear about the opt-out, because people are not obligated to gather that. Because the way this was done, I didn't get all those same clarifications that we put on pays were part of this. That's lack of notification.
That was my question, was the students did this in school? And did we allow them to opt out, or did we explain they could opt out? And if we didn't, I have no problem.
It's voluntary. They're being provided time, but it is voluntary, and they're being notified that it's voluntary.
And these are for grades 7?
7
Yeah.
through 12.
7 and up.
And it's long, is it not? Isn't it around
About
10, 12 minutes?
Yeah, 10 to 15, typically, yeah.
Because we did receive a notice from a parent responded to the parent survey, who came to a conflict with the nature of the questions, or that their child would be asked these questions. All I ask is, as we go to do this, those surveys that touch into this sort of realm, and if I'm the only remnant who had that sensitivity, then you don't have to worry about it past April or so.
Well, no, I have the same sensitivities.
I would like to know in advance. The notification, we've been doing the June 15th now, the document and did not allude to what we would be gathering. It was simply that we were hiring the firm, the contract was very short. And then we can use them for what we want to use them. I would still like to know, as a board member, what we're using it for in advance of the public. Yeah, I don't know if anybody disagrees with that.
That's a good point.
That's all. And that way, you know, I'm not going to stand in the way of it. I am interested to know from a research perspective, you know, going into it. Forgive me. Denise, are you still on the phone? Okay. And the only reason I asked, and I asked about Denise specifically, Denise is in this space, and during the voting on this, she was very clear that her familiarity with the company is a good reputation. But when you gather information on these surveys, you want to gather the information specifically to know how you intend to use it and what type of decisions you want to drive from it. Because if it's a long survey, you eliminate questions. Doing a survey, it's great, you got their attention, I can gather things. I want to gather things that are relevant to it only, and keep the survey short to keep the response rate high. I hope that I have your agreement on that aspect of it, Denise. You're a professional in this space.
That when I field surveys, we do collect IP addresses for exactly what I think Barry said it, I don't know, to ensure the quality of the data. So if we see repetitive submissions from a single IP address, you know, they get flagged. In my case, remove the data. If you enter the school, obviously that IP address wouldn't count because you number of hundreds of submissions. But when you're seeing outside that realm, if you see 20, and you know, that raises a question and they can look at it. So it's not an uncommon practice for the but I can tell you that we would never provide the IP addresses to our clients to reveal anything because the privacy of the people completing it is paramount. I want to echo that I would like to have known that this was going out in advance. I would have liked to have seen the survey before it went out. I also look forward to Andy Schultz to speak to this at the diversity meeting last month. Conversation about not a clear understanding of what climate survey means. And so some people looked at it and had something to do with like the weather, or that it was like some kind of spam thing and disregarded it. So I would like to see, as reminders go out and additional messaging on this go out, that it have a clearer explanation of what it is, and don't title it, you know, in the subject line climate survey, just, you know, if you want to Council Rock survey or something, to encourage people to open it and actually pay attention to it. And then in the copy of the email to get clarity around the purpose and what the questions will be asking.
It is what it is. What's the deadline for closing the survey? Is there what's the ending date intended?
There is. It's October, whatever. Let me see what the Fridays is.
So if we go through a second round,
13th.
that's fine. If we go through a second round of notification to try and boost response, maybe, rephrasing the title and also mention the safeguards and carry on. I'm not going to stand in the way of it. It just creates that, I'd like to know, because I do support the idea of getting the sense. It's, we need to get the sense of the community. I just want to make sure that we do it in a sensitive and culturally appropriate way. Right.
And speaking of surveys, I went to the Council Rock Coalition of Healthy Youth meeting tonight and learned that we have decided not to do the 6th grade, include them in the survey. And word is every other district is using the 6th grade information, and catching the students, getting information on what their exposure is to various drugs and alcohol is probably very important in 6th grade, because it's before high school where we really have a problem. So I didn't even know anything about it, us not participating. I feel like we should know these things when they're happening.
Are we, what's the date of, is this the pay survey?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, this is the pay survey.
Yeah, let me first say that I had communicated that to the board quite a few weeks ago. It was in one of my weekly updates that we were not giving it to the 6th grade this year. The reasons being is that in the past it has been controversial with 6th grade parents.
It's a long time ago, not just a few weeks ago.
It was a while ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's a considerable amount of time to make that decision.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could have predated Catherine.
Go, but by a long time.
Oh,
ago.
good.
Long time ago. You didn't miss it.
It may have been before you were.
But for those who are playing at home,
Yeah, no, you didn't miss it.
this may have predated Catherine being on the board.
And the other piece for the community to know is that we are not the only district who's not giving it. I do know of 2 neighboring districts as well who are also not giving it for the same exact reasons.
This has always been a question, which is it is a standardized instrument, as I recall, and there are certain sensitivities that our community has expressed in the past, whether it be about drug use or whether it be about gender and sexual lives. It's been expressed within our community before. So, without expressing opinions, I really don't have an opinion one way or another on it. I can understand why you might make the change.
I look at it as, what's the educational benefit to Council Rock knowing this information? That I think is.
Well, I actually think there's a tremendous educational benefit to Council Rock, because this provides longitudinal data to study the trends and help devise our efforts and strategies on how to meet the needs of our community. I believe, this is my recollection, at least from the time that I'm before, that the concept around the whole 6th grade was coupled with a communication error in the emailing of parents and lack of awareness. And I mean, it wouldn't be my preference to have a 6th grade meeting and communicate to parents in a understanding of what this survey does, the value, why we value this, and then they can make an educated guess to opt out. Now, that kind of improvement may have led to higher than a high we're used to seeing, but it would not have made us completely void of data for a whole grade level, because it's unfortunate that our longitudinal study will see the data from surrounding districts and, throughout the state. But one of the beautiful things of data and the richness it's provided to us is that it was so specific to our community. And it allowed, other things that we do to be very, and so it is for me with some disappointment that we are not collecting that data, or at least not approach the 6th grade as more of a conversation. Like I said, to me, it seems like a lot of controversy came communication.
Okay, we're
You're in and out, Denise.
Yeah, so I don't want to cut her off. No, it's okay. It is what it is.
I think you got the gist of what you're saying, though. It's, you feel it's necessary. You feel it's, yeah.
Just so I'm clear, the pay survey historically, I believe, also opened the avenue to certain types of funding or grants that we would get.
Right, we could not get the DFC grant without the PAYS.
DFC stands for?
Drug-free communities, same thing with Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency grants, we cannot get them without the PAYS information.
Okay. And for those people who don't know Debbie Moskowitz, Debbie has been involved with this. You're doing it almost 20 years now.
It's about that, since Act 211.
Yeah, so, you've done it in all phases, whether it was volunteer for many years and then on staff, covered by a grant, and I don't know what your status is today, but it should not go without being said that I know the board, I'm pretty sure I speak for the board, when someone takes such a dedicated interest in the health of our students, I know I speak for the board, I'm sure I speak for many of the community, you're really a very quiet player in this thing, but you've made a big impact in the many years you've done.
Well, thank you, and thank you for doing the PAYS, because it really is critical, and we get great information from that on school climate, on substance abuse, on all the addictive behaviors, and also with the, there's some parenting issues in there, and that's why I think maybe parents have a problem with it, because they ask a few questions.
They're not easy questions to answer, sometimes you have to lose.
But they can up there, so.
Yes, they can. Other topics on the survey? Any other thing else on the survey?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to say a comment that I heard last night.
Now we don't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're in and out.
Sorry, I'm in my car. Something relative to the climate that Hanover survey is that in the verbatim area at the end, they have a 50-character limit.
50?
Yes.
50, which that is a very, that's like you're asking for.
Even Donald Trump can't write something in that short.
Right, it's not even as long as it's
Okay.
I don't know if that's something that can be corrected or changed and expanded, but that character limit is not really trying to solicit additional time.
All right, I just want to make sure that we get Kyle and Wendy back. I'm picking Wendy, Kyle and Ed, they don't look like Wendy at all. I'm going to step out and just pull them back in for our next topic, which is grandfathering.
So just a quick question, what's the output for the survey? When will we see it down on that, or how's the information jumped in? I mean,
Yeah, very much.
I feel like it's pretty direct, but I feel like it's going to potentially give us some insights that will help with a myriad of things you might.
They're going to share just some of the initial results with the cabinet team in early November. And then it takes, after that, and first of all, we have to determine if we are going to close it on the 13th, based on the kind of response rate that we're receiving. We can't extend that. So their reporting back will be dependent on when we close the survey. But right now, we're looking at very late November, early December for them to actually put the full report together for us.
Good, I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Barry, do you have any updated figures on how many survey takers we've had so far?
I could probably pull it up and tell you where we are to date, if you'd like to know. 2 minutes.
Why don't you have the board? I just want to get, for the grandfather discussion, I just want to get, I'll write it here.
No, I can do it, Jerry,
I just want to make sure it's a nomenclature.
Hang on, just,
What are we doing?
I just want to see where we were, how many surveys have been submitted. I'm just going to give you the, I don't have the results, I just have the number of,
While he's doing that, I just want to.
3187.
3,187.
Yeah. Most of those, there are some students, some staff, but most of those are parents. Okay.
Thanks, Barry.
I'm just asking, Matt, if you just list I just want to make sure we get the nomenclature as we talk about grandfathering. I want to make sure we're talking about the class of, so we don't confuse ourselves with migration over years. So just go down to 2018 ascending, and just go 2000, make it a series ascending.
But this way?
Yeah, 2020 is after that, that's the year of graduation, keep going. That's what I'm saying, just make it a series ascending. Go down a little bit, yeah.
Wait a minute.
You gotta run through
That's fine,
23.
that's good.
23 is current 7th grade.
And then in B, right next to 2018, put 12 and make that a series descending. Make that a series descending. All right, so what we've got there is our current 5th graders in the class of 2025. I'm just doing that so we speak consistently, right? So right now we're talking about the class, our seniors are class of 2018, and our 11th graders are class of 2019. So as we talk about grandfather, I'm going to turn this over to Robert to speak about it. But I just wanted to use that nomenclature so we don't confuse ourselves.
Yep, that's good.
Where we are.
So where we left off last Thursday was, I interpreted board consensus. We had 6 board members present to indeed grandfather the current high school students. Obviously, the class of 2018 is irrelevant here. So that would be the classes of 2019, 2020, and 2021.
So can you put grandfather in that column?
GF?
Or just GF, that's fine. Thank you. Just as you go, Robert, sorry.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
just for my benefit, because I've yet to watch that, unfortunately. Back to school night, that was unanimous among the 6 board members?
We have spoken of it in the past, and the general sense, to go a little improvement from Robert, was the general sense that I had of the board was that any student who starts at a high school, will continue at the high school.
Right.
So that would also most likely include our class of 2022, because by the time we get around to wouldn't they?
Not
Not necessarily.
next year's redistricting for the.
Yeah, secondary
Okay,
districting.
That's why we're talking about that. Okay.
Yep. Okay, so we're,
Can you say that again? What, for the class of 2022, which is your 8th grade?
yeah, Denise, we're gonna come back to that.
I was wrong.
We'll return to the class of 2022, which is 8th grade, current 8th grade. So-
Was there any negative feedback to this or any discussion around cost of doing this, just out of curiosity?
There was discussion about what will the cost be, but without regard to cost, those things currently marked GF up there, which is 9th graders up, those were accepted as.
No, so just my question, just saying again, I didn't have the benefit of being there, I haven't watched it. Was there any opposition to that, or was it? unanimous?
No, it was unanimous.
I'm just curious.
So what you're saying is, you've got a child in high school, we're not moving.
That's exactly right. You've already established relationships, you're on teams, clubs, with teachers, so we'll keep you there.
Okay, can I ask, just, sorry again, so is that a choice or is that a mandate? So if there's somebody at South today, a freshman at South today, who through redistricting now sits in the north feeder pattern, would they have the ability to switch to north if they wanted to?
Well, that's going to crank up the busing costs.
More than that, my opinion right now is, that's
Maybe
not, my opinion,
Right.
my opinion, is that's not an option, that's the way it is. And the reason that is the way it is because otherwise I start to run afoul, I think, of some of the PIAA rules, where I start to allow children, I give them some domain to pick which school they're in, because they may be choosing because of team associations.
I think the
Versus
short
academics
answer,
or whatever,
I think the short answer is, we didn't get into that level of detail.
because I'd be interested to talk about that.
Yeah. Good question.
So,
Now, I just want to clarify, because I can't see whatever you're showing up on the screen. So the consensus is that anyone in the class of 19, 20, or 21 is grandfathered.
Correct.
Getting that right?
Yes.
yes, that's right.
I may suggest, related to what you're saying, Andy, that conversation could be attached to a sibling that may be redistricted to a different high school. So you may want to consider, if you're going to allow that selection, that it only be to avoid having children in 2 different high schools.
Yeah, I mean, you're running buses the next year anyway, so I don't know if necessarily adds all that much cost. Mike?
I'm not,
No, I just can't understand. I mean, I think it's bigger than just saying we're gonna blanket grandfather for these classes. I think what I like about it is that we're allowing kids who started somewhere to have continuity through, so I completely support that. But also, you know, it begs the question for a 7th grader, or I guess what would be a 6th grader if somebody, right, who's a, you know, the 9th grader today or 5th grader who's got a sibling, do we want to let families grandfather, is that fair? And or do kids who fall in the district now want to move faster than the grandfather? I think we have to make some decisions on what that looks like.
So let's catch up where, I want to let Robert play out his plan, our discussion we got to the other day, because before we started trying to carve off the edges, we were trying to find the body of it.
Right. So the other piece that was discussed is the class of 2023 and grandfathering those students, especially for the sake of the Richboro Middle School students, because they would have 4 schools in 4 years. Otherwise, so at least for the Richboro students, we can keep them together as a cohort and move them to Holland Middle School. So that was the other level of consensus that I interpreted.
that's the current 7th grade.
Current 7th grade, class of 2023.
So
Yep.
Newtown Middle stays where
Newtown Middle stays, Holland stays, and Richboro goes to Holland.
And then they go to,
Well, then we didn't answer that,
okay.
right? What does grandfathering mean for that class? Does that mean that you stay in that feeder pattern the whole way through 12th grade? Or when you're ready to transition to high school, now do our new boundary lines?
Right.
Take effect.
So 8th grade is also GFX, it's for the extended grandfather.
Why are you?
It's just not, because that's what we're talking about, so that's, the thought was, it's different than the official, the 9th grade out. I just wanted, because we're discussing, I just wanted, the thought was, for me at least, moving those people as a group, because otherwise you cut them into a small segment when you split them, when the branch splits, they wind up being.
But if the 8th grade.
Jared, I think you're talking about the 7th grade, it will be 8th grade next year. We're not talking about the current 8th grade in which high school they would go to. So the grandfathering would be the 7th grade class of 2023, moving into 8th grade next year.
Okay, so where's 2022?
That one was not discussed.
That would just go with the.
Right, that's the next.
There was no
That's this
consensus on the class of 22.
Yeah, if we're doing middle school redistricting to drive capacity in schools, my thought is that the graduating 8th graders should go to the high school that the future redistricting pattern is going to represent. And I would also, and then again, we got to answer the question about siblings and the question about do 7th graders, you know, get a choice, or do we move them all?
It could pose a big problem because we have the 2 middle schools the same size and more children on the south side. It could cause a problem if, you know, if there's a lot of latitude about who can go where, and we're trying to achieve this balance, it could pose some trouble.
Yeah, we're gonna have a capacity issue at Holland, next year for 8th grade. The school will be able to hold it, but because we're keeping all of Holland and all of Richboro together and combining them together, we either need to create an additional team or half team, or else we're gonna have large class sizes. I mean, those are the realities.
Is it worth saying, hey, if you want to go that way, you can? And some people might, and some people might say, oh, the alternative of larger class size over there, I definitely want to go. I mean, they might. I mean, how many kids are we talking about? Oh, we don't know. I guess we don't know yet. Sorry.
No, we do. I mean, they're in Richboro Middle now. We do know how many.
No. How many of those kids would end up in the North Feeder pattern from that class? Sorry. I mean, we could look at Sundell model, but we're not.
Okay, go ahead, Denise, start again.
According to conceptual redistricting, we're talking, I understand it's conceptual until the committee forms and they look at it more closely. But according to the conceptual redistricting, it averages out at roughly 25 students per grade level that would move from south to north. Okay, so I'm very confused because I thought that when we said that we would grant something, I didn't believe that that's when but currently, so 22.
We're hearing every third word.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Denise.
What I got out of what Denise said was there were 25 kids per grade at Richboro Middle. This is my understanding.
We're talking about 25 kids.
Can you hear me?
Sometimes.
Can you hear me?
Every third word, it's not.
All right, I'm gonna drop. Okay, now?
All right, sorry, go ahead, Jerry.
What I was hearing was the conceptual redistricting so far, high level concept, was about 25 kids per grade would be split off to somewhere. So I'm gonna assume that would be to north, you know.
I'm reluctant saying those out loud because they're taken as gospel.
I'm quoting, forgive me, I'm quoting on
It's.
Robert, do you have a perspective on this?
Well, I was just going to say it is 25, because it's 164 plus 13 is what's on that conceptual map. I think our decision point here stops with the class of 2023. To me, the students who are younger than that definitely go to where the redistricted lines suggest that they should go. The two questions that we have is, one is those 7th grade students who are grandfathered. Are they grandfathered only for middle school, or are they grandfathered the whole way through high school? And then really an accompanying question is the class of 2022. Are they grandfathered to stay within their existing feeder pattern? Or again, do we say, hey, we've redrawn lines and some of you are going to go to the opposite high school? Those are the two decision points that I think
out loud. I mean, the constriction is the middle schools.
Yes.
So if we've got them in one of the two middle schools, why would we split them then to the high? We can accommodate them in the high schools.
From a space standpoint, we do not need to split them.
Right.
At the high school level.
So these are middle schoolers, trying age for kids. Barry, you know, what I don't want to do is grandfather, so this grandfathering lasts for 5 years. You know, but we've got to plug in middle schoolers. We just push it.
For me, my impression was, and this was a shoot from the hip, so I'm open for my going into the thought was that 7th on up would stay where they were going that way. But what I'm hearing from you, Robert, is that the constricted part of the snake with this large bolus is our middle school at Holland. That's gonna stretch the snake a lot when it passes through Holland.
But it's a one-year problem?
It's a 1-year problem, and it's going to happen anyway.
Okay.
So no matter what we decide, we're going to have that 1-year issue at Holland Middle School.
So so I'll lose my shoot from the hip position. I have to look to you guys. My perception is it's beneficial for those children together. I think I said this the other night, unless it were prohibitively expensive, okay, the thought that we might need to add another section, we just don't get the savings quite as early as we would otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
I look at Mr. Papazian here, who is part of the Richboro Middle School tribe, you know, and, well, it's the Indians.
What community?
I don't know, I go to Cleveland games this year,
All
so
right,
that's what they call them. They, you know, he's part of that grouping, whatever you call it, group. You know, so I'm sure there's some affiliation with those kids too that, you know, bring a team over in that model also helps to alleviate or ameliorate those children's introduction to that school. I think there's something to be said for it.
I think it's good to talk about all the desired aspects of grandfathering, but I don't think we have to make commitments at this point beyond.
I don't think we can. We don't know this.
Yes, thank you. So, I mean, I think we, in spirit, all agree to the concept of grandfathering those who are in high school now.
Agreed.
And beyond that, there's a lot of good discussion about what's desirable,
But at this point, I think it's way premature to make any commitments, even generally,
So to Ed's point,
without knowing costs and numbers.
Yeah, so to Ed's point, is it feasible as you prepare the redistricting plan to show different levels of grandfathering and cost, meaning here's what only the high school grandfathering and the current 7th grade grandfathering, which everybody seems to be supportive of, looks like, and the cost. Here's what adding the current 8th grade and keeping them all the way through it south is, and the cost. And oh, by the way, here's what's keeping all those siblings. Because that's a big question for families. And, you know, my sense is the more we do, the more expensive it is. And I started going, you know, to me, it's about ripping the Band-Aid off a little bit more, but at the same time, if it's not cost prohibitive, we should be as flexible as we can. My sense is as we get farther down that road of desires, it becomes less reasonable or less.
Well, it also becomes a complicated mess.
Yeah, exactly.
You go much below 7th grade, then we're not redistricting, we're just scrambling.
So how do we, so then begs the question, if we kind of said, hey, you know, 8th grade, 7th grade is kind of cost dependent, look stuff. How does it, is the next level question, how do people feel about siblings?
I just want to be very clear about grandfather, and this is just in general. I do not like grandfathering when it's the kids and the parents that decide. And this, maybe I'm draconian in this, or Machiavellian, I can't figure out which. My problem with that is when you leave it up to the parents or the children, and they go to that school, and they have a problem that they're, you know, it's a difficult period, it's a difficult adjustment, and they experience difficulty with that adjustment, they blame themselves. I made the wrong decision. I made the wrong choice. My dad took the wrong decision. I don't want to introduce that aspect to a family. I would much rather wear that mantle and be the board. They screwed up. They put me in the wrong school. I'd much rather keep the family dynamics pure and clean and have them be the bad guy in this thing. That's just because when you leave it up to them, it's a difficult. And the thought may be, maybe it would be better if I had gone to the other one, maybe I made the wrong decision. They don't know. I'll rather wear that.
It also creates conflict between parents and children. So if you have kids, if you have parents that have always been a North or a South family, and that's where older kids have gone to, and the kid says, no, I want to go with my friends, and the parents have a different perception, you create an issue of choice and conflict within the household there too.
So I'll wear the mantle of the bad guy.
Meaning
I'm not giving discretionary grandfather.
To spout or
He's not talking about
to kids.
We're not talking about siblings, we're talking about discretionary.
So you're going back to where we grandfather somebody, we're not going to give somebody the choice to go to work. We're not talking.
Right.
So, okay, so we're not talking about the question I asked was what do we do about siblings?
Siblings are the
Same
same
thing.
problem. It's the same. It's
So we're not, so once they've been redid, doesn't matter where their sibling went, what's the, why I'm just talking about it.
When or
When
goes?
or going now. I may
That's
make
different.
because it's different. If brother went through North and is now in college, I don't care where.
No, but my point is, so,
Simultaneous.
right, so if there's a 9th grader.
Yep.
And there is a, what's it, a 6th grader? So you got a senior sibling here, but the current 5th or 6th grader would have been redistricting to go to the other high school. We're saying that sibling gets to follow their.
No.
Okay, I'm with you, I just want to make this, okay.
If they're
However,
both
if
in
you
the
have
school
two
at the
kids in
same
the same
time,
school,
if they're both in high school at the
Then
same
they're already
time,
grandfathered.
then they're already grandfathered. Yeah.
But somebody who is is a 9th grader now will be a senior, when their younger sibling would be a 9th grader. If the lines change, they're going to the other school. Okay.
You know, and the only reason I say that is, I just talked to neighbors the other day whose sons are twins, and they've just now gone to different schools. You know, one's going to one university, one's going to somewhere else. And I said, well, how's that going? She goes, it's really their first time to be independent people. As a high school kid, it's an experience to be independent.
We as a district have done it once already. We opened south. I mean, when we opened south, Jerry, you can speak to it. I mean,
Where's
No, I just want,
the
because these are the questions that the community's come to us with most locals, right?
Well, I think.
So when we give these guys their marching orders in order to be efficient about the work, we gotta go back to some of those, call them guiding principles around what's this look like, so these guys have some direction. and
That's
know
not
how to base our
grandfather, that's
instance.
legacy stuff, and
I don't grant, but I think that goes again, these are guiding principles around grandfathering, here to see a school, go to a school, we gotta give.
But when we have to be very careful about the trickle-down effect in terms of realities and perceptions when you do get to this elementary school. Because we have had plenty of emails from folks already asking about grandfathering, primarily from your community, I feel like, in my recollection, of people that are sort of because of by nature of where their homes are located. And so we're gonna run into this again further down the road, and we have to be very clear in the principles that we are laying out, or the basic tenets that we believe, that once you're in high school, you get to stay in high school. That's not gonna carry down through all of the redistricting.
Exactly, so if you're moved in an elementary school, you don't get to finish it out, even if you're a sixth grader, you gotta go, and that's just, right, okay.
Because you're moving, largely moving a larger group of people you know. The other thing is the interaction of kids in elementary school is much more controlled by adult supervision. Your closest friends are the kids in your classroom.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it's not optimal, but we haven't done it.
So
it has to be done. You've got to make a hard call.
Can I just ask for clarification? I think I heard two different things. I'm not sure I understood about this grandfathering in the high schools. Because I heard no to legacy, meaning just because a graduate of a high school went there, a sibling doesn't go. But I think I heard two things about if there's a student who's in 9th grade and a sibling who's in 8th grade, and let's choose South in Holland. So if I'm a sibling in 9th grade, I'm going into 10th grade, and the 8th grader is part of the redistricting over to North. I kind of heard two things.
Well, it depends what we do with that 8th grade class.
But even in the future, because it could be the current 7th grade class or 6th grade like you described, it could be a 9th grade. So I thought I heard as long as they were currently in the high school, and then
I would entertain that.
As would I.
I would entertain that.
I don't think we came to any conclusion.
Okay.
We talked about what we'd be willing to discuss.
Anything down, anything 8th, 7th, 6th, which would be students coming in with a freshman in high school now, I think are questions for us that get more financial, though, the grandfathering of those three things. But I'm kind of with Jerry that I think the conversation is more around existing 7th and 8th graders. I think the 6th graders go where they go.
I'm glad you raised that question.
Because they got to go into the new middle school. We got to follow the new middle school patterns. That answers the question for me.
22 and 23 are going to be in high school when this is implemented. No? When is the redistricting implemented?
For secondary schools, it implements next year for the 18-19 school year.
Oh, just because the middle schools will be done. Now I'm getting it. Oh, sorry.
Is Denise back?
22 would be in 9th grade.
And I think she's still correct.
Right, Denise.
Now we got you.
I'm glad Barry raised that question. That's just one of the many things we're gonna have to consider. And I think at this point, we're not precluding anything and we're not committing to anything other than high school.
That said, I think the more clarity we can give now before our redistricting committee starts, which starts this coming Tuesday, the better off we are.
I think simple definition makes it the easiest.
Can I just say something? Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Loud and clear.
5 by 5.
So I'm going to say I'm very disappointed. I would like to see us have a commitment to grandfather everyone in the current 7th grade and up. So 2023 on down. If we're not actually going to commit to that, I know this is going to sound kind of strange, but I would like to actually not then commit to grandfathering the current 7th grade at all. I don't actually see the benefit of moving the entirety of Richboro Middle School to Holland Middle School to only separate them at that point. If they were going to be separated, let's separate them. I mean, and understand, I don't want to separate them. I want them all to move. But if we're not going to commit to that grandfathering, if they move now as a group out of 500 across 2 teams, it's a far easier move, I think, than, first of all, to transition into Newtown Middle School in a team setting would be, I think, better socially and emotionally for these students. 950 students, and then having to, so they're transitioning to that new school, and then they're transitioning to south, north with an entirely different cohort.
I think we said that unless it was cost prohibitive.
Right, and I think, let me
move
let me make sure we are where we are.
Yeah.
My impression, and this is where I'm going, so let me then look for agreement here. Unless we find something that is amazingly cost prohibitive,
Or educationally unsound.
my impression right now is that grandfathering is from everything up through 2023, our current 7th graders. 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th.
Right.
That's my impression.
That's what I heard.
Yeah, in their feeder patterns, and not just into the middle school, through the high.
Right, so I've got me, Mike, you're shaking your head, Andy,
Assuming it's not cost prohibitive, yes.
Kathleen. So,
Just for the sake of
let
clarity.
me just finish.
Hang on, we're
my thought.
going around the table.
Kathleen was on this, Kyle was, and so, okay, so everyone present, including you, I believe, Denise, is of the impression that 7th through 11th, because 12th will be done, will be, Richboro will stay together, go through Holland, and from Holland on to South. Okay. Is that
And
where
kids
you're
that,
going?
and kids that are in Holland, and kids that are in Holland.
Sure it's clear for the start of the redistricting committee. So that means that when this redistricting committee starts, their charge will be to look at redistricting plans for the current kindergarten through 6th grade only elementary students redistricted.
No.
That's
Yes.
Well, wait, they're going to establish
Boundary
feeder
lines.
patterns
Yeah.
Yes,
for
that's.
those
exactly.
schools and what middle schools they will populate thereafter.
Yes.
But the children in,
the movement of students would affect what we will implement and where students move and where sending patterns move. Yes, the neighborhoods will change, but the impact will be from the 6th grade down.
right, only,
Yes.
the only child who may experience a different school and a different grouping would be the 6th grade on down. Everybody else will stay with the group they're with now.
But,
And if they go to Holland, they go to South. And if they go to Newtown, they go to North. Elementary schools is where redistricting happens.
But for conversation purposes, for next year, we're only talking about 6th grade to 7th grade because we're not redistricting elementary until the following.
That's right.
So there's one grade level will be redistricted for the 18-19, start of the 18-19 school year. That would be the 6th grade students who will be redistricted.
Existing 6th grade.
Yes, redistricted to either Newtown and or.
So we have to do the work, because my next question was gonna be, does that give us flexibility on timelines? The answer is no, because we gotta let those 6th graders know where they're going.
Correct.
Got it,
And then
okay.
you can't do the elementary.
So the Holland, we're telling the Richboro folks we're going to Holland, they're staying in South. We're also telling the Holland kids that might be redistricted to North in that future, they're going South too.
So
let me
what we
see if
are,
I can,
what we are doing is we are, just so I'm clear, progressively, we are eliminating consternation or concern within community. We clearly have eliminated what was the existing concern, and I thought we had ameliorated that already for the 9th grade, touch a school, you're there and you're good. With tonight's conversation, we seem to be coming to the conclusion that the middle school kids.
Unless it's cost prohibitive.
Exactly. Okay, so that's where we are.
So,
Go ahead.
so that I don't know necessarily, to Denise's question, in terms of guiding principles before, as you start to charge this committee, although there is a desire and a sentiment that a majority of this board wants to take this from 7th grade up, I don't think we've all, without seeing the cost and what it entails, said that's absolutely what we're doing and we're only dealing with other things. I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
I hear, I had a,
no, that's all right. So one grade will be redistricted effective next year, and that is current 6th grade.
Correct.
Exactly. The other thing that I found a little bit confusing in a sense when we're discussing this is the redistricting committee will be looking at moving students initially only in the elementary grades, but they will be looking at the feeder patterns and redistricting for the future at all grade levels.
Yeah, that's really all they're doing.
And I think that's important to emphasize because
But it's feeder, it's not redistricting. It's
right.
elementary goes-
Yeah, and so what sort of got lost was, or there was
there was a misconception that, oh, okay, if we're doing this grandfathering, then the redistricting committee is not redistricting at the secondary level. They're only going to focus on elementary. No, they're going to do district-wide redistricting. It will not be affected at the secondary level immediately. So it is.
It starts with the sixth graders.
Yes, this is a district-wide redistricting at every grade level. The effective years is
K to 6.
the complicated factor.
Right, exactly, I'm not gonna try to prove it, that's what it is.
Yep. So every kid who's in elementary school today, theoretically by January, will know what their secondary education looks like.
So, now, granted, now we have two persons who are not here. You know, I know that from Wendy's past conversation, I am sure she agrees with what we have labeled there, 2021 up, the GFs, because she assuredly agreed with that previously. I won't speak for her, but I imagine she'll be good with the GFX as well. And Mark, I believe, was concerned. He also, my impression was he agreed with the GF, and I have a feeling, again, with the caveat, I think that was a conversation that subject to financial impact that we are.
Yeah, I mean, if it's $1 million a year, I'm gonna say rip off the Band-Aid.
Right. So subject to that, my impression was Mark was also agreeable with GFX, which takes it down to 2023. So I think you have, Robert.
Yep.
Now, this was your request to have this tonight.
Yes.
I want to make sure that you have, coming out of this, a feeling of what I would ask, Barry, if you would, can you summarize this? Okay. Can someone summarize it just so we circulate it so that Robert has it, because this will be a topic of discussion. People are going to say, I want to have questions and answers. We had a discussion.
Does it make sense to kind of, I defer to Robert and Barry and Susan about, we got a communications, but we got to get really good about communicating the facts of what we did. Exactly. This is probably a pretty worthwhile one to say, this is what discussed, this is going to be the charge. However,
subject to financial.
Definitely put the caveat.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Denise.
Just procedurally, because I'm still confused, because I feel like we're saying we want to do this, but then we're getting ourselves an out in case we don't, relative to what I believe is 1 or 2 grade levels. I am not clear on what the charge of the redistricting committee is going to be. Are they going to start, and the approach will be that they are going to focus on the sending patterns for K to 6, and then the secondary issues are, at least for the moment, administrative, because you're going to look at those costs and set that aside from the redistricting committee? Or are they looking at the whole thing simultaneously to you evaluating costs? I don't know how long it takes to figure out what these costs are, but I just think that the secondary anxiety is very, very high. And, if we can honor this commitment to grandfathering and let them know sooner rather than later, I think that would be a gift to the community. But I just don't, it's not clear to me how you would instruct the redistricting committee with this gray area.
You don't need to instruct for the kids that are in middle school now. Your committee shouldn't touch the kids that are in middle school now.
But when she spoke and she said simultaneously, I would think it really is it's a holistic view. It has to be.
They have to go draw the line, the district lines for the district as if everybody was moving tomorrow. And then there's a body of kids that we're talking about for grandfathering. We're going to have to put extra buses on for, or maybe not. There's a cost to that. So here's what the redistricting looks like, guys. And oh, by the way, there's an added cost to that of X amount of money to do the grandfathering work that you want to do. And
well, Robert's charter.
Are you studying demographic numbers of the lower grades, or are you looking at the current 7? I mean, it's probably not a huge difference, but if you're looking to what your enrollments will be to understand the impact, if you're not looking at, the 7th and 8th grades, it was a different 2 years out, which sort of speaks to what I was saying about what the enrollment trend would be, because enrollment could improve over time, in terms of decreasing, and if your space issues are different. So I just want clarity that the redistricting committee would be using K-6 data primarily.
Denise, I think it's primarily K-6 data, but we're going to have the data for middle school right at our fingertips. So we will certainly put our eyes on that as well.
Okay, and how long do you think it takes to try to estimate the transportation costs for the grandfathering?
It all depends on how long it takes for us to build consensus with first the committee and then with the board around those lines. So honestly, you're talking probably about halfway through the process, maybe a little bit more.
For the last thing, I mean, ultimately say, here's what we want to do. Here's the kids that are grandfathered, then you got to figure out what they cost based on existing buses.
At the rate,
Ones that you can ballpark that. I mean, it's.
Yeah, they're going to be estimates.
Here's the question. One, I'd like to see, not for publication at this moment, but the written minutes of what we think we've decided. When's our next finance committee meeting? 12th. Will we have numbers?
Yeah.
Will we have numbers for the 12th?
No.
Ballpark, okay,
Oh, no.
just ballpark, I was trying to figure. I'm just trying to figure out, I'd love to make an announcement of what we're thinking about, but I just don't want to, you know, it's there, oh, look, the number sucks. You know, it's,
I mean, you can look at this and say, listen, it's 25 kids per grade impacted, right? So you're talking about 150 kids over those grades that are impacted. And, you know, what's that, 5 buses? What's the cost of 5 buses? And it won't be 5 buses because there's going to be some synergies on the existing buses. So I think you guys can give us an idea of.
I can't
imagine.
imagine.
I can't imagine it's swaying our decision either.
I can't imagine it's gonna be more than $125,000.
Yeah, you can look, you can look at the back of the envelope and make a decision. I think you can get to that fast.
If we're keeping everything clean without student choice to go to the opposite school, the cost is going to be negligible. I don't know where the cost really would come from.
A little bit of busing, we think. And they might
Probably
not-
not. The buses would run.
The buses are still running.
The buses are-
Everybody drives their kids anyway today.
your expense, can I
Right.
Which is a huge issue.
Empty buses.
tell me if I have this wrong, but the redistricting committee will not really need to concern itself with our grandfathering.
No.
No.
They're redistricting for the future.
Yes.
What we decide on grandfathering doesn't have much bearing, if any, on.
They're gonna go in and plan, focused on the sixth grade and down. They're gonna focus on getting that right. Realizing that'll have a life of its own and grow through the thing. What we've done tonight, or what we've.
Well,
discussed tonight,
no, they're gonna look at secondary too.
They are, but the life of sixth
through its
grade
life,
teachers,
through its life.
Yes.
What we did tonight doesn't figure into there.
Yes.
Because this is still in buildings that exist,
Yeah.
with people who exist. They're figuring the future of sixth grade on, and kindergartens. Those people, K through 6, may be altered of, you may have been in 4th grade at this school and 5th grade at that school. That will affect their lives.
So barring any surprise, seems like everybody.
You got what you need?
Yep, sure do.
Good work.
All right, we are 9 o'clock, it's 2 hours. Public comment?
Great time management.
I know.
It's you.
Okay. No, but thank you for being part of our meeting tonight, both of our members of the public. Thank you all, and we're gonna end the meeting now. Thank you.